We have our father here as our special guest. I'm not allowed to identify him, but he's been a very critical figure in this whole debate about the erosion of parental rights and what's happening to our kids with transitioning and stuff. I met him for the first time in, I think it was November of 2018. Might have been November of 2018, and I ended up writing a story for the Post Millennial on the outrage that has happened to him, and his case so clearly not only, as I mentioned earlier, kind of explains the danger of SOGI 123 and putting these ideas into the minds of sort of troubled young kids, but it also tells you that we have an authoritarian move going on by our government to trample parental rights and to trample religious diversity, and his story is very instructive. So if Rob, you want to come up, do you want to hear, or where would you like to stand? Okay, so
I thought for a minute there when she had the mic that they were going to make me hide and look this way, and I thought, boy, it feels like I'm back in court, and I never get to look at the gallery. I'm always talking just to the judge when I talk. So
you can adjust the microphone if you want.
Is it a little bit too low? Can you hear me better? Okay.
You can adjust it there and pull it up higher.
Yeah, well, I think I've got it.
Okay. Or you can just take it out and hold it if you want, whatever you want.
Yeah, this is fine.
Technical difficulties are temporary.
Perfect. So I know I spoke at the Parliament buildings earlier today, and it was kind of more of a rally kind of mentality, but I know for this event, I'm going to kind of try and go through the story. It's quite long. If anyone's seen any of the interviews, I mean, I can go on for an hour to get through this whole thing. I mean, it's a saga that's in the courts has gone on for about 2 years, but I mean, the story before that is 3 or 4 years ahead of that. When my daughter was in grade 5, she was hanging out with the boys, and she was getting into a lot of trouble. Just typical kid stuff. She was, and we got a call from the teachers there, and I thought, you know, what a great idea. Let's get her in touch with the school counselors. I mean, what else would a parent not want to do, right? I mean, this is common sense. These are the people that are going to help. And so, looking back to the very beginning, I mean, this is where all the problems started. And so we drew up a safety plan in the school in grade 5. You know, we were going to go to Disneyland that summer with I have another child, a son, and everything seemed good. And I thought this is the right thing to do. I mean, what parent wouldn't entrust their children to the school counselor when there are issues in school? Grade 6, and I'm going to kind of skip through this quickly because a lot of the stuff that happened before I got into court, and I know I got an introduction. If anyone doesn't know, I go by a couple different names. CD is my court name, and then Clark has sort of been my media name from the beginning. And the reason I went with Clark is I was talking to the National Post, and they said, well, we've got to come up with a name for you. And originally I said, well, you can just pick one. And then I thought, you know, I'm going to be Clark because my identity is not allowed to be revealed. So it's sort of that Clark Kent Superman thing. That's why I picked Clark. So anyways, so I'm going to kind of go through this early phase a little bit quick because I was an ignorant parent that didn't know what was going on. But there were some signs, and as we got into grade 6, my daughter was like, well, maybe I'm a lesbian, and she didn't really know what was going on, still getting in trouble, still seeing school counselors. And then in grade 7, she suddenly, I walk into the bathroom, and there's some paper towels on top of the garbage can. I pull it up, and there's all her hair. She's cut it all off. So I'm looking for her. She's on the computer, and she's wearing a toque. And she won't take it off, but I'm like, I know that's your hair in there. And sure enough, she cut off her hair. She didn't really give me an explanation at the time, and I just thought maybe she was just sick of having long hair. Some girls like short hair. Again, not really knowing what was going on. My first real clue was when I discovered her school yearbook at the end of grade 7, and they had changed her name. And also in grade 7, she'd had a crush on a male teacher as well, which was very odd. So she was getting in trouble for that because these teachers want to protect themselves from the students that way. They don't want to be liable. So they right away raised alarm bells. So that was an interesting thing going on in grade 7, plus the fact that I discover afterwards that, yeah, she's now got a male name. And she didn't tell me this. And I was furious. I even called the principal, and I was angry. And this was sort of the first time I thought, what is going on? Why am I, as a parent, not involved in this decision? And again, I'll explain what happened there, because it all comes out in affidavits in court, because these people finally had to start telling the truth. So we're going from grade 7 now to grade 8, and the high school now is going to accommodate my child. Special bathrooms, certain classes that she can go in. Everyone in that school is going to now refer to her by this new male name. She's now transgender in the sense that she is kind of playing it socially. And again, I thought, well, it's probably a fad. Most parents would think that. And if it's not, well, whatever. And at that time, I wasn't even thinking about cross-sex hormones. I didn't even know that stuff was out there. And in the meantime, she starts seeing this psychologist, who in court documents is Dr. I.J., and I can assure you, Jen has mentioned his name all day today. I can't. And I was told that from my ex-wife that this guy was the top transgender psychologist expert in British Columbia, and that they would assess my daughter and we would figure this out. I thought, well, clearly she's not transgender. So I went along with it, but I didn't know anything about Dr. I.J. What I come to find out later in court documents, which I'll get to, would shock any parent. So anyways, through this whole process, she has a crush on her PE teacher in grade 8. So again, I'm thinking, well, if you're a transgender and you're a girl being a boy, why are you always fascinated with all your male teachers now? One after the next. And so she got into trouble. She got kicked out of that class, in fact. And then she started cutting and doing sort of suicidal things. And so I took her to Surrey Memorial Emergency. And the psych-registered nurse explained this, that she was, it had nothing to do with the transgender stuff. It wasn't any of this dysphoria stuff that I was learning about slowly. It was the fact that she was upset because she had been rejected by this male teacher. But of course, these files get sealed at Surrey. And in fact, I've never been able to unseal them through the courts. And the courts, and I'll get to that too momentarily. So anyway, so we're concerned. So we get this Dr. I.J. to speed up his results on his assessment. And of course, I've spoken with him and explained my position that she's got mental health issues. This is the help. She needs that kind of help. Well, no. This Dr. I.J. says she is a prime candidate for cross-sex hormones. I'm referring her to BC Children's Hospital, and this will solve all her problems. So this explains self-isolating, sitting in your room in the dark, being on the computer. That to me sounds like a mental health issue, and that a lot of kids go through. And then as we're sitting there, with my daughter sitting beside me, he does announce this. He's announcing this in front of her. And of course, now she's like a kid in a candy store going, I want these hormones. I want these hormones. So a number of months later, there is that appointment at BC Children's Hospital. My ex-wife goes with her. I'm working. And I get a call about an hour into the appointment. And now we have a Dr. G.H., which I don't know if you mentioned that one too much, but he's the doctor at BC Children's Hospital who actually holds the needle. And because Dr. I.J. only refers, he doesn't have the qualifications to actually do that part. He can only refer these people over. So I get a call from my ex-wife, and they tell me that within the first hour, they were going to pump her full of testosterone. And I said, what? I said, according to BC Children's own manual, they go through a lengthy psychiatric assessment. This is in the first hour. And so I had it stopped through my ex-wife. And I get handed to me, my ex-wife drops off this consent form from BC Children's Hospital. This is the most alarming form I've ever seen. And if anyone knows Frank Vaughn, you should watch. He did a whole thing on this form. It is absolute insanity. And it tells you that these cross-sex hormones will cause sterilization, infertility, that's the worst ones, increased heart disease, osteoporosis, it stunts your puberty, and it's right where you're at. And those are, and then it also tells you, yeah, you're going to have facial hair, you'll never get rid of it, you always have to shave, you have a lower voice. But of course, that's what these kids want to see. They don't read the other part. And in fact, this form goes on to say that this is an experiment, and we do not even know the harmful effects. It's like, what child can consent to a form that I don't even believe an adult can consent to? Because how can you consent to something where they even tell you, we don't know? And the form goes on to say, this will not change your DNA. You will not actually become a boy if you're a girl, or a girl if you're a boy. It's in their form. And so even BC Children's isn't crazy enough to be in denial, as a lot of these other people that promote it seem to want you to believe. So I said no. I was bothered by social workers and their team at BC Children's for about 3 or 4 months. And then it was December, not November, it was December of 2018, where I get this form from BC Children's Hospital, and they say that I no longer have access to any of my child's medical history. Anything that she's going to do is out of my hands, and that if I don't file, I have 2 weeks to file in court, or they're going to start pumping her under the BC Infants Act with testosterone as a mature minor. And guess what I did? I went to provincial court and filed a notice of motion. And then I ended up meeting Jen, because I had a girlfriend at the time who was connected to a lady named Angela Ireland, who many of you know, who got in contact with Jen. And Jen was kind of like, this is the smoking gun. We knew they were going to do it, but we hadn't seen the evidence they were actually going to use the Infants Act to essentially...
I knew this was the case, so I knew that this was the big case that would blow everything wide open. If, and only if, people were allowed to hear the information.
How old was your daughter? 14?
13 when she first...
13 when she first started seeing Dr. IJ. And 14 when they were going to start doing the testosterone, yes. In fact, today is her birthday. She turned 16 today. So that's where she's at in terms of her age. So I go in, but ahead of my first court date in provincial court, Jen comes over with this Angela Ireland, and that's the story he's talking about in the Post-Millennial, and Jen had access to these documents. In fact, I think he put links to them in that original article. Yeah. And next step, we proceeded into court. I ended up getting a lawyer named Herb Dunton through the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, although the Justice Center kind of left the case, and it was essentially Herb Dunton as my lawyer and myself. We went in provincial court. We got an injunction the first time we were in for 2 weeks, so that my ex-wife could get a lawyer. In the meantime, thanks to Jen's story, a big story came out in the National Post. In fact, I had people in Mexico phoning me up saying, hey, we're talking about your story down here in Mexico, because it was front page, and it was about 4 pages on the inside. And the interesting thing about this story is that the National Post sent photographers to my ex-wife's house to take pictures of her and my daughter, and they came to my house to take pictures. We were successful in having those pictures not put in. And of course, I was a bit naive. I didn't realize the pictures was going to be a mistake. But you see, what they'd always done on that side is call the father a transphobe, just destroy him. And that was the goal of this story in the National Post. And they thought this would be the end of it. But what happened is that the backlash around the country and around the world was dead set against what they were doing to my daughter. And this completely changed the game plan for what they were doing on what I would call the left. And they didn't know what to do with it. They really didn't. And so I've even talked to my ex-wife since then, and they said, yeah, that was what we would call the TSN turning point, where they decided that we're not going to play this game. We're going to now gag the heck out of this guy, because public opinion has shifted when they read what's happening here, and it's not helpful. So a little bit after that, we ended up back again in provincial court, got another adjournment to get the thing into BC Supreme Court. So we go into BC Supreme Court, and this is in February now of 2019, and I'm in front of a Justice Bowden. And we're just going in there because we're doing a petition, because we want to have a full case heard with expert doctors and everybody else involved to have these cross-sex hormones not administered. And at this point, she hasn't had them yet. Unfortunately, this nice lady, well, I'm exaggerating, Barbara Finley, has decided to become a lawyer for my child. And she's a sex activist, lesbian lawyer. She admits it. It's in her own postings, so I can say that. And so she is now signed on, and she's got a whole bunch of these other activist fanatics who are on her team as well. And so they go in and so this is a civil case that we filed, and now they counterfile with a family suit. And so there's two concurrent cases running. So I have the one which is me, and I went after everybody that I thought breathed on my daughter. I went after the school counselors. I went after the school district of Delta. I went after the Ministry of Education. I went after Fraser Health. I went after Dr. IJ, Dr. GH. I went after BC Children's Hospital. You name it. And I'll tell you, by the time I got to the Court of Appeal, I had 2 lawyers, they had 50 in the courtroom. And you guys are paying for that, just so you know. So, because they were representing your interests. Even the Attorney General was there in the Court of Appeal saying he was there on behalf of the people of British Columbia. He said that. But anyways, we're not quite at the Court of Appeal. But going back to the case, it's Justice Bowden. But he decides to make a ruling. We never asked him to make a ruling on the cross-sex hormones, but he does anyways. And he tells in his ruling that I have to refer to her using her chosen pronouns, and that anything otherwise is criminal violence or family violence, that I can only affirm what she's doing. I have no right to dissuade her, or that is the criminal violence or family violence. And that she's allowed to legally change her name, even though she's a minor, and change her vital statistics. So now she is listed in Canada Health as a male, right? Which skews all the vital statistics because men get different problems than women do, no matter if you're taking testosterone or estrogen or not, right? But I violate the very first evening. I get a call from the Federalist out of the United States, and I do an interview with them. And I say, I will not refer to her using female pronouns. It's a delusion, and I will not live in the delusion. I said they are using her as an experiment, as a guinea pig. Well, I get hauled into court a couple weeks later, and I'm in front of Justice Francis Mazzari, who happens to have connections to West Coast Leaf and among other groups. And she throws the book at me. In fact, she wanted to throw me in jail for the criminal violence. She convicted me of it. But the lawyers on the other side said, no, we're not asking quite for that, not yet. And so she hammers me with this conduct order, which is what they give to criminals. And in that conduct order, it says that I can only talk to my 2, and now I have picked up a second lawyer because somebody else found interest in this. So I heard that now the guy named Kerry Lind, you may have, if you've read any of this, you will have heard of Kerry Lind. And they tell me I can only talk to these 2 lawyers. Nobody else, not even my parents. I can't have a cup of coffee with any of you individually and mention this case. Or my consequences at that point would be, and this was issued in the conduct order, is that I can be arrested without warrant by the RCMP or any police having jurisdiction and brought before a BC Supreme Court judge as quickly as possible. That was what I was under. Unprecedented, unheard of. And the only thing I was allowed to do, and it said this in the court document, believe it or not, that I was entitled to my own thoughts. They said the only thing I have is my own thoughts. And they said the reason is that they could not police my thoughts, so there was nothing they could do about it. So I remained silent for many months because we were working on the Court of Appeal, and I didn't want to mess it up. Because what happens is if I would have talked back then, the Court of Appeal said, well, your client's, he's just blatantly ignoring everything and he's just doing whatever he wants, and so we're not going to take this seriously. So I knew I had to be quiet, and I did. And meanwhile, that judge also had ordered that my daughter could start the testosterone. So she started testosterone right after that initial Bowden ruling in February of 20. So she's been on testosterone since that date, so about a couple years. So anyway, so I waited and I waited. We put our case together for the Court of Appeal, and in September of 2019, we finally got heard in front of a panel of 3 appeal court judges, and one of them being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or of the Court of Appeal, sorry, which is the most important judge in British Columbia. He's the top judge in this province. He wanted to be there. And so we put out our case, and it's going back and forth, and this is where they had the 50 lawyers and I had 2. And of course, Barbara Finley's like, these kids are like are like cocoons and they're coming out of their butterfly to be transgender. It's just ridiculous activist nonsense. Like, I'm like, this isn't even proper. These guys aren't even behaving like lawyers. This is activist jargon. And we're trying to explain to the courts, how can a child ever agree to these treatments? How can they consent? It's impossible. That was our argument. We're like, we don't care about the Infants Act. Even though you're using that, we're just trying to focus on the fact that you, mature minor or not, there's no such thing as being able to consent to this nonsense. And in fact, at one point, one of the lawyers, and I thought she was going to fall down and hit her head on the ground, was trying to point out that there was a Bible in my house, and therefore, as we are in court right now, I'm committing family violence by having a Bible in my house. That came up. And one of the three justices said, no, ma'am, we have very strong laws on freedom of religion. So thank goodness he said that. But they tried. They tried to get me to do a Bible burning. But at the end of it all, he said, but yes, your daughter can keep doing testosterone. So that was how that ended. And so we waited about 6 months to get a ruling from the BC Court of Appeal. And we got one this year, January, so January of 2020. What this ruling did is it took everything a step back. It said, no, this is not family violence. We're taking off the criminal conduct order, and we're making it, where did they make it? Sorry, it was a protection order, now they made it a conduct order. And if I said conduct order before, I was wrong. It was a protection order under Missouri. Now it becomes a conduct order, which is civil as opposed to criminal. And they said yes. And there's a couple things that came out of the Court of Appeal that are really, really important and really a big win, actually, believe it or not, and buried in all of the stuff that wasn't very good. And the one thing is that they told me that I did have the right to dissuade my daughter. I could show her literature, whatever I wanted, research, and convince her otherwise to change her mind. Of course, she'd been on testosterone 2 years, right? It's not like we can go back in the time machine. And then the other thing, and this is, and I don't know if Jen's touched on anything that's happening in England right now, where these detransitioners, and I met with a lady named Helen Joyce from The Economist, who's intimately involved in this case in the UK, where these detransitioners are suing Tavistock, which is the gender clinic in England, because what these kids are saying is that, how could I have consented to this? You rushed me in and you ruined my life. I was a child. Why did you listen to me? So what the Court of Appeal in British Columbia has done is they have said that the courts cannot determine, like Bowden did in the original ruling, what's in the best interest of the child. Sadly, neither can me as the parent. I'm not allowed. My parental rights are gone. I'm not allowed to determine either what's in the best interest of my child. And more importantly, this is the important part, the child cannot determine what's in the best interest of the child. This is in the ruling. And this is where all these cowards hide. They hide behind the children and say, well, the children wanted it, so we're just affirming what the child wanted. But the judge said, absolutely no. What's in the best interest of the child lays squarely, 100%, on the shoulders of the doctor that said this was in the best interest of the child, which is huge, because this opens up the door for all these kids, when they detransition in 5-10 years, to say, yeah, you can't blame this on me. We got a precedent court setting here that says, you can't blame the kids. You can't hide behind us. We were kids. We were 13. And these doctors are going to have to own the massacres that they have done. And so this is the really good news in all of this. So moving forward, we were determining whether to bring this to the Supreme. I know it's a win for all these kids down the road. Sadly, it doesn't help them today, but boy, it's going to change things in the future, I sure hope. So we were determining whether to bring this forward to the Supreme Court of Canada. We decided not to, because we were actually quite happy with what we had gotten, and we realized that the Supreme Court of Canada is probably going to be more liberal, because our understanding is that the BC Court of Appeal is actually the most conservative court in Canada, and we weren't going to do better anywhere else. So this is as good as we were going to get. So I decided to drop my lawyers because I didn't want them in any trouble. And I decided I'm going to ignore all these court orders that tell me to keep quiet. And that's exactly what I did. I did interviews with Frank Vaughan, with Laura Lynn, with the Federalist. The Federalist flew out. We did an interview there. And it was just a massive onslaught of different interviews at that time. And in Canada, they just kept disappearing because Google was court-ordered because they weren't allowed to post any of this stuff, right? So they were all taken down. But we were a little bit smarter than that. We had sent everything over to the States and made sure that it was all backed up on different platforms. And so you can find them anywhere if you want. It's not actually that hard because we knew what was coming with them. And so and Jen now plays a direct role in some of this stuff here, is that Laura Lynn, because she had done an interview and she decided that she wasn't going to give in because they already sent letters, and she's like, I'm going to wait a little while. And so she was called into court. I had made an arrangement with Jen Smith that I was going to do an interview with him. I hadn't even done it yet, so he advertised. And so they called Jen into court. So there's me, Jen, and Laura Lynn in court because we have broken the court order, because they facilitated the interview and I did it.
I was just thinking about doing an interview. I hadn't actually done one, and they dragged me into court.
That was about it. Yeah, it was just an idea that they caught wind of on his social media.
Or can they?
So anyways, but of course I had dropped all my lawyers so I could do this, so I had no lawyers. And so the first day I represent myself, and of course Jen and Laura Lynn also represent themselves. And now we're getting into all the freedom of speech. I mean, this isn't even now, I started this court case about testosterone and cross-sex hormones, and now they've turned this into something completely different, which is taking away my voice and destroying my parental rights and everything else. So this whole case has now turned on its head and become about, I think, everything that's wrong in Canada right now. Right? And everything that's wrong in the world. You know, like this is a global thing, and like my story's been in Australia. It's been in England. I mean, it's been on Breitbart. It's been the Federalist. It's been, you know, no, it's been in all the local papers. Maybe the black press doesn't own the ones here. I don't know, but it's been here because it's been in the Vancouver Sun and all their papers, like Calgary Herald, of course. And it's been on Global, CTV, City TV. Rebel News, yes.
But not as much as it should be.
Yeah, Rebel News. We've got some really great guys like Frank Vaughan out in Ontario who's covered this. Laura Lynn obviously has her Laura Lynn TV. I mean, there's a long list of people that, you know, are kind of putting their necks out and sharing the story as well. So we're in court, and the judge gets me up, and he's like, I really want to hear from that father. And he goes, Mr., and I'm just going to say CD, even though I use my last name, why do you do what you do? Why are you breaking gag orders? And I said to him, I do it because this is what's in the best interest of my child. I said, I'm the only one, well, not including, but I'm talking about the activists that are surrounding my daughter. I said, I'm the one person here that's actually putting her best interests at heart. None of you are. You're putting your agenda ahead of children, right? And then 3 days later, Jen did an amazing presentation. I don't know if he's touched on it in the courtroom. I thought it was fantastic what he did with using a TV and just showing what happened in Oak Bay and just kind of explaining why he needs access because he was being gagged to be able to talk.
Yeah, this became it's still a freedom of speech issue because they're not only gagging CD in this case, but they've actually told me that I'm not supposed to be out in public naming this doctor and letting people know what this doctor is doing in public. So I am fighting this in court. Like, I actually had kind of a victory in the Supreme Court after doing the presentation that he's talking about here. But the other side, the team of lawyers on the other side, has immediately appealed it. So it's gone into the BC Court of Appeal, but it's just been sitting there for months now. But it's still up in the air. They don't think that the public should be allowed to know who these doctors are, and I think that they should.
Yeah, no, these doctors are all over social media, and now they're hiding. And they're hiding, but like I said, even behind children. I mean, they are a bunch of cowards. And who's to say they're not the ones planting this information? When they read the Federalist story, who's to say they're not the ones sending death threats to themselves, as they were saying in court, that all these doctors are getting death threats because of this court case? And yet there they are, Barbara Finley, which I can say her name because she was the lawyer. You got IJGH, and you can find them. They're all together doing conferences and talking about how wonderful this stuff is, right? And they were so proud of it, and now there they are hiding. So I don't see how they're proud of it anymore. Because you think if they thought what they were doing was a great thing, they wouldn't be hiding. So anyway, so the last day, it was 4 days, Laura Lynn kind of got, well, it was kind of a mixed bag because, I don't know, do you want to explain what happened with you in terms of how they sort of gave you something and then right away took it away on the last day of those 4 days?
So that was a whirlwind. So you say it was 4 days, but basically it was a 2 or 3 week period where there was short leave. So I was given 24 hours notice. I got all these notices from all these different lawyers that I was in violation of the court order and I had to appear in Supreme Court in 24 hours. So I had 24 hours to appear. I had no lawyer. They didn't even give me the right to get a lawyer. They said I had to go in immediately. So I went in, and I'm kind of an obsessive-compulsive person, so when I get dragged into a debate that ultimately is an academic debate, I get like sort of obsessed on my subject, and I want to dig right in and make sure that when I'm presenting it, that I present it as thoroughly as possible. So I killed myself for about 2 or 3 weeks. Where I was getting like 3-4 hours sleep a night for that whole period there. But I managed to put together a presentation that the judge found and that was actually kind of an interesting thing, because I think when I first went into the Supreme Court, the judge didn't take me seriously. I think maybe because of my appearance or something, he thought I was some sort of clown, and he wasn't really treating me seriously. But by the time I started speaking, because of the fact that I'm a very careful researcher and I'm a public speaker, I know how to present and stuff. And so once I got communicating with him, he realized, okay, so this is not a buffoon. This is somebody who knows what he's talking about. So I put together a power presentation with all of the key things, all of the key concerns, and arguing why this needs to be in the public eye. And by the time we got done, basically he had conceded that, yes, the public has a right to hear this information, but I'm not going to give you a complete right. So what I'm going to allow you to do is, if you're I'm going to let you give talks like in rooms like this, where you can name the doctor and associate the doctors with this case, but only in those rooms, nowhere else. You can't write about it. You can't, go on TV or anything like that. Only in these rooms, and you have to control the people in the room and tell them they're not allowed to talk about it when they get out of the room. So it was a very sort of limited victory. But even that limited victory, the very moment the judge ruled that, the other side leaped to their feet and immediately filed an appeal. So it was the order was suspended, and I'm still technically not allowed to name the doctors in a setting like this. So it's going to go into the Court of Appeals. So I got a minor victory. Fortunately, they appealed it, so I don't have to pay for the expense and everything of getting into the Court of Appeal. I'm going to try to take it to the next level, because I think that I shouldn't just be restricted to saying this in a little room. I should be able to shout this from the highest rooftops to the people of BC. So this has spawned, so this original case now has sort of branched out into two very distinct cases. There is CD's case there and what's happening with his daughter and his rights. And then there's this freedom of speech thing where I'm arguing that public activists like me have a right to name names, connect dots, and tell people what is going on in society. So we'll see what happens. But one of the interesting things about that, I think, and that sort of is touched on here in terms of the outrage that's going on, is something that or pointed out by something that I said to the judge in court. And it's one of the reasons that even though there were some lawyers that came forward at some point and said that we'll consider representing you, I didn't want a lawyer, because I knew that I was going to have to go into the court and that I was going to have to say things that no lawyer would say. Because there are some outrages going on in this case that call into question the integrity of the court. And that's what I did when I got in there. I phrased it in a careful way. I said to the judge, I know that you haven't been involved from step one, but I basically called into the question the integrity of the court. And I said, what has happened in this court is the court is ordering a father to lie, to speak lies, and to say his daughter is something that she is not. And when the court starts forcing its citizens to speak lies, it is untethering itself from the truth. And the moment it untethers itself from the truth, it at the same time untethers itself from justice. The judge, I could tell the judge resonated with that comment, but he said nothing. He just looked down and wrote on his little paper there. But the interesting thing is that no lawyer is going to say that. Okay, so that was why I decided to say it myself. But that was the outrage, that we have a state now forcing its citizens to speak lies. Even when the well-being, the health and well-being, and maybe in the long term, the life of his daughter is at stake.
So then we went into a break on that fourth day, and then it was my turn in the court, and the Attorney General was there. He was there for all 4 of these days, and what ended up happening is that they had the option at this point, because obviously I was there because I had breached the order, and they had the option to go after me for civil contempt of court, which is civil, not criminal. My daughter told her lawyer, Barbara Finley, do not go after my father for civil contempt of court. I do not want to see my dad in jail. She made this clear, and then she went up to the judge, and Jen was there, he can vouch for this. She kind of said, but please call on the Attorney General to go after this father for criminal contempt of court, which is worse. And the judge decided he would do that. So he called on the government of British Columbia to pursue charges against me for criminal contempt of court. That was how we essentially ended that day.
That is your ruling NDP government. This is the ruling government that is basically forcing its citizens to speak lies and criminalizing parents who just want to protect their children.
And the Attorney General and the government of British Columbia decided that's exactly what they were going to do, because they had some time to think about it. And of course, we had the coronavirus stuff. And what's interesting is a lot of these court cases are Zoom. Well, they were able to open up the courts on September 2 to get me in there to start this criminal contempt of court hearing. So I show up on September 2, and I have now Carrie Lind as my lawyer, and we've done a lot of different talking about how we're going to approach this case. Because at this point, in their documentation, they're going after me for between anywhere, well, technically the judge can say a fine, but they're going for anything from 30 days in prison to 5 years for what I've done, because it's so terrible to talk about your own child in public. Meanwhile, the rapists and the murderers are getting off with less, right? But apparently I deserve 5 years for speaking the truth. And what happened that was very interesting that morning, a couple of things, is that I walk in and it's now a criminal trial. This is not where I was before. And I'm not going to get into all this stuff, how it's never happened before, where a civil case or a family case has ever become criminal. It's never happened. This is the first time in the history of Canada that a case that was not criminal to begin with became criminal without something going on. It should have remained either civil or family. But anyways, if you ask lawyers who have been following this case, they have no idea how this stuff is happening. But it's political. It's very political. And Jen speaks to the money. I mean, there's a money component, obviously. I mean, that they don't ever want to lose. And people are waking up. This is scaring them because, I mean, we have a room full of people here that are aware of what's going on. But that silent majority, that mainstream is waking up. You'd be surprised, and Jen and I will even talk about it, because it's one thing to preach to the choir, but if we can wake this group of people up, we win, and they're waking up. So I end up in what they call the prisoner's docket, and so they stick me in this thing with bulletproof glass, and of course my lawyer Carrie Lind is late, so I'm representing myself again. I'm like, oh boy, this is like the biggest thing going on, and where's my lawyer? And finally he walks in, he's dressed up like Gandalf the white suit, wearing sandals even. And he walks in and he goes like, where's my client? Where's my client? And he doesn't even introduce himself. He just comes in like a ball of fire. And he's like, get him out of that prisoner's docket. He is not a criminal. And the judge actually relented, and they put a chair right beside the prisoner's docket. So So that was kind of an interesting.
I came in kind of late to that particular one. It was kind of interesting because I came in and I'm like, where is CD? Where? And he's in this prisoners thing. I was like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah, but the interesting thing that happened, and this goes to show you how political and how secret this is. This whole case is the Attorney General said, I have no access to any of the files in this case. He goes, I go down to the clerk, and they say, you can't see anything. The judge goes to him, he goes, you know what? I'm a judge. He goes, I don't have access to the files. He goes, I'm relying on you lawyers as you file to give me the papers because, he goes, I've never heard of it as a judge that I don't even have access to the files in this case. And what I've learned from the very beginning is that the Chief Justice of the BC Supreme Court had seized himself to this case before it even was in the BC Supreme Court, and all along had been handpicking all the judges the whole way through. And that is fact. Never unheard of. It's unethical, and it's not supposed to be done. And because of this, these files have been sealed in a way that is by somebody that is above these judges even, to suppress any of this information. And the problem is, it's all up here. I've been there from the beginning, right? They need me to be quiet because I'm one of the few people that knows what's in that humongous box buried in the back of the clerk department. And so just think about that, how a judge can't even access the court documents from this case. So anyway, because this judge had decided that he wanted me to be charged criminally, our next court date, December 14, is going to be to try and have this judge recuse himself. And I'll tell you, this will be the third time we're trying this. And we're 0 for 2. And most lawyers never even attempt this once in their entire career. We're going for 3 in a row because we just know how dirty this has been. We probably won't get it. So that's what's up next. And then they're essentially going to be setting up a trial, which will be 4 to 5 full days, sometime probably in the winter. And then there's going to be a sentencing period after that, as you would find in a criminal trial. So that's where things are right now. And I don't want to take up too much time because I've kind of sort of gone through the story without getting into all the little things. I mean, there's interviews out there you can see. I mean, some of these get into a lot of these other issues and details. But I want to say this, and this is because I feel these children are victims, and I hope people will remember that, because it's easy to look at these kids that are transing and going, what are they thinking? Well, they're not, but it's because they're being brainwashed. They're being groomed into this, and these are the real victims. And I look at, and I said this morning, I've said it in an interview a long time ago, but I think it's important, is that these children, because they're so vulnerable, and Jen talks about the ones in foster care, but they're also in the school system. They're everywhere, these vulnerable kids, and they're unhappy with their life. They say, I don't like being a girl. I'm not happy with where I'm at. I want to be just something. It's like that superhero complex. Like I don't want to be Clark Kent. I want to be Superman, right? And I liken it to being an avatar, where they're telling you, well, you don't have to be that sad girl anymore. You can be whatever you want to be. Be a boy. Start over. I have a whole new identity. How easy to escape your actual problems by believing in this nonsense. And guess what happens down the road? You have children with mental health issues that are now exasperated by adding something that's even worse than the mental health issues they started with. And they worry about suicide at that age. Try the numbers in the Swedish study of the suicides when they turn 25, and now they're dealing with the mental health issues that were never resolved, and they're dealing with the fact that they're sterilized and have all these other problems.
And lifelong dependence on pharmaceutical medications.
That's right. So just, like I said, think about these kids. I'm so proud of what's happening in England. I hope it happens here, and I hope a lot of heads start to roll down the road here, and I'm pretty proud of, I'm dealing with the courts, and of course even Jen's found himself in the courts, but it's almost unavoidable now when you're dealing with this stuff because we're terrible
I'll be
people.
back in court again after tonight, so.
And Jen does show up to court, but he's lucky sometimes and he doesn't sit in the prisoner docket. He can sit and watch from the gallery.
Not yet.
Not yet. But, I've always said this is like a 3 kind of pronged attack. There's the media, which is getting the information out. And that has been something that I've really worked on. I know Jen works on that part of it. We've been trying to get the story out as best we can. And I think we're doing one awesome job in that. People are waking up. Number 2 is deal with this in the courts, although the courts have gotten, a lot of the media that I've gotten has come from being in the courts. And then 3, where we're going to change this is once we get those 2 things figured out, meaning the public pressure, we can get guys like Jen elected who can change the Stupid Infants Act, right? That's where the change is going to come, is when the people wake up and we can get that third prong going. And so, God bless Jen, and I hope people like him, and I said it this morning, people like Laura Lynn, who's running in Abbotsford South, people like Laurie Thronis, who's now an independent in Chilliwack, I hope they get voted in. That would be the most amazing thing. That's a start, a huge start. I love what I'm seeing federally. The Conservative Party, I talk to people who say that behind closed doors. The Conservative Party is talking about this court case, and they are on my side. They just don't know what to do with it. But then there's a brave guy like Derek Sloan who comes out and works with Jen Smith and says, we're going to table this on the House of Commons, a national inquiry into the medical transitioning of children, both foster and otherwise. And so where were we at the last federal election? Candidates were getting booted if they even sneezed something against this stuff. Now we've got guys like Derek Sloan running for leadership positions, and it's being taken seriously. What a change in a matter of a couple of years. So everybody should be proud. Right? So if you're in this riding, and I'm not, so I can't vote here, but if you're in this riding, get out, vote for Jen. Let's make some change.